Okay, welcome to the Mission 2, T2X Commentary. After the first mission, we wanted to give the player a chance here to get reacquainted with their tools and to basically drop them back into a more traditional thief environment. Because one of the limitations of the first mission was that we had so much plot and story to convey, we didn't give the player a chance to really go and steal anything or to use their tools or inventory in a way that players might be used to. And so right away we wanted to drop the player into a map where they could start sneaking, they could start using their weapons like their sword and their arrows, and play more traditional thief space.
Right, and this is, we felt like this mission was imperative. It was imperative that we communicate to the veteran thief players that this is going to be the thief that you're used to, because the first mission was a little odd, and just in the sense that it was very linear. And there weren't a lot of options. And, of course, one of the hallmarks of Thief gameplay is options, many entrances, many exits, many ways to accomplish your objectives. And we really had to herd the player in the first mission, like Dave was talking about, through the streets and through the mansion, and to get her where we wanted her to go. With the museum, we really wanted to have almost the opposite of that, where just there was multiple ways to get around, a lot of ways to get up and down. We didn't want just forward movement, but vertical movement as well, and a lot of opportunities to explore, a lot of opportunities to get in and out of the various rooms, and just in a variety of ways to accomplish the goals. And so it was real important to us to communicate that here, just to let people know that this is going to be the type of, the thief game that you're used to, that you're familiar with.
So here we're starting out on a rooftop. This was originally Fett's idea. We wanted to start on a rooftop because all thief players like traversing rooftops. And you don't have a lot of options of where you can go here, but we thought this was, it served two functions. For one, it served a really nice vista, and it reminded players that they were in a thief game. And second of all, I think more importantly, we wanted to give players a little safe area to basically experiment with their weapons. And we don't introduce any new inventory items here because we wanted to get players reacquainted with traditional thief gameplay. And so we give them a sword, the knockout hammer, we give them a few different arrow types like water arrows, moss arrows, vine arrows, and a few inventory items that are really pretty simple like healing potions. Mm-hmm. But we wanted to give players an opportunity to basically take those weapons out, to look at them, to kind of plan what they were going to do in order to break into the museum.
Yeah. Well, here we should talk about the complications of non-hostile AI, an ongoing complication, because here she's approaching these guards, and obviously they're not attacking her.
Whenever we had open city streets, we had the problem of determining whether or not we wanted the guards to be hostile, and in most cases we wanted them to be non-hostile because it doesn't seem realistic that City Watch would attack a woman for no reason on the streets. And that actually is different from the way that Thief originally does it. Thief always came up with a fictional justification. The first two Thief games, anyway, came up with a fictional justification for why the guards on the streets would be hostile to you, and used non-hostile guards in a very limited capacity, really only in one or two maps. Mm-hmm. But we felt it was more important here fictionally to just kind of allow the player to wander around as a non-hostile force. But that has a number of interesting complications, because Thief, unlike a lot of other games, doesn't have a really large HUD. It doesn't have really clear feedback that's presented in a non-immersive way on screen. There's no crosshair that turns red or green. There's no pop-ups or anything like that where you can communicate clearly and effectively to the player who's hostile to you and who's not. Mm-hmm. And there's really two scenarios that can happen from that are erroneous. I mean, the first is that a player assumes a guard is hostile when they're not, and that scenario really isn't too bad because the player will sneak around them and they'll kind of manufacture gameplay for themselves, and if they're never any the wiser, then that's fine because they've created gameplay. But the scenario we absolutely wanted to avoid was the one where a player assumes that they're safe and then would run out and be attacked, because that's when they'll definitely blame the designers and get frustrated. And so we didn't want to have too many non-hostile guards in the game. We just wanted to have them where they were fictionally appropriate.
Yeah. Anytime I get attacked in the game, I just blame the developers anyway. I mean, it's never my fault. But this might be a good place to. I kind of mentioned her in the last mission, but Valletta, who was one of the main plot people, especially toward the end when we were trying to just get all the loose ends tied up. She was real instrumental with some of these minor characters, such as the curator here in the museum, Curator Limes, as well as with, I believe, the hotel manager later on in the game. And there were several of these minor characters that, they weren't just necessarily crucial to the plot, but they definitely added color. Well, I guess he's crucial to the plot, but there was a lot of these that could have been very flat, very one-dimensional NPCs in the game, and she really had a way of just zoning in on these areas where we needed to have some more life with the characters, and this guy in particular, she gave him some little quirks and some, just mannerisms in the way that he writes and the way that he talks, and she really kind of took that on. I think I don't know if she did it consciously or not, but it seemed like anytime we had kind of a character in the game or in a mission that we weren't really sure what their personality was going to be like, she jumped right in there and could just come up with with all these things that just breathed life into him and made them memorable. And he certainly is. We'll talk about later. So, odd little thing with him that we discover in his office that she came up with, but. She was real good with
those minor characters.
With the minor characters, yeah.
And here it's interesting. He's the first big guy that you knock out in the game. Thief and Thief 2 were both kind of limited in the body types of characters, and in Thief 2X, when we went to create our characters, we gave a lot of direction to our character artist, and we communicated that we wanted to have all different body types. So there's some really skinny guys that we have. There's some really big fat guys, and then there's some normal guys and muscular guys. And we wanted to have a variety of body types for variety and realism. But we realized that when we created these really big guys like Limes, that it wasn't really necessarily realistic for a 140-pound woman to carry around a 300-pound guy. And Thief kind of glosses it over because I guess Garrett's assumed to be like really strong, and all the guards that you face really aren't that big. But in our situation, we felt it was more realistic, I think, to not allow the player to pick up these big guys. And so Limes is the first really big fat noble that you encounter in the game, and we wanted to present him in this kind of safe, secluded environment where there's not a lot of guards around, so that when the player knocks him out and the player realizes that he or she can't pick him up and carry him, that there's not too many negative consequences from that necessarily, not unless they lure a guard into that room. And so later that becomes like an important gameplay dynamic for us when we start using them a lot more, and also when we get inventory items to help deal with those big guys that you can't pick up and carry around.
Yeah, and it definitely makes you more, you can't just indiscriminately go around knocking these guys out. You got to be careful, and then again, it also kind of lends, I think, to communicating the vulnerability of the player. She's not Garrett. She's not a guy, and that doesn't mean she's necessarily weak or anything. But she has some limitations that he doesn't have. She can't just pick up these big guys and go trotting off with them. She's got to be careful, more careful than probably Garrett is even.
So speaking of limitations, I'll bring up real fast. In the original version of the T2X, before we patched it, we actually made Zaya less efficient at hiding than Garrett was. We did a slight retuning of the light gem because we felt like Garrett was the ultimate master thief. We felt Zaya would be a little bit less skilled, and really there were so many good thief players out there that we wanted to make it just slightly more challenging, not really drastically and not in a way that's going to alienate any casual players, but really just slightly more challenging and really force players to look for that deep shadow to hide in. But that actually, people responded negatively
right.
to that. So it's one of the things that we patched out. We made Zaya more efficient at hiding. Right. And that's not something we anticipated, because usually thief community players are very adamant about having very challenging maps. Mm-hmm. And not that I think it was a whole lot harder. I think it's just that their expectations were not always necessarily met. Yeah. So we wanted to resolve that.
Yeah. And I meant to mention earlier, when she picked the lock to get into the balcony door there with the hairpin, that's kind of I thought was a nice little addition, different from the lock picks. But again, one of the advantages of having Strange Blue and Valletta and some of the other ladies that really helped out with the plot, they would add these little things. A guy would have never thought to use a hairpin as a lockpick, but or maybe you did. I don't know if you came up with that or not.
But one of them. I don't
may have been
though.
one.
Yeah.
But there are just little things like that just having that. Gaming it's not really anymore, but traditionally has been kind of a guy's sport. And I felt really fortunate on the plot team to have a good mix of guys and girls that could contribute things, especially with having a female lead. You really needed that female perspective to help us understand some things that maybe as guys we wouldn't have gotten about Zaya. But I thought the hairpin was a nice little touch as far as that went.
We had discussions about what we wanted to make fictionally different in terms of inventory items. Like, we didn't just have healing potions. We had like healing oil, which we felt was just kind of, we put a little pagan spin on it. Mm-hmm. We had the sword was a little bit different. We had a knockout hammer instead of a blackjack, and the hairpin lockpick instead of the traditional lockpicks at the start.
The infamous blackjack hammer.
Yeah, that was actually an interesting decision we made. We originally wanted to give Zaya a more traditional sap or a blackjack, because Garrett uses a blackjack to knock guards out in all the thief games. And we originally wanted Zaya to have something that was very similar, and then later give her a power-up, which was the hammer, which would allow her to basically knock out helmeted guards or some of the more tough opponents that you would face that ordinarily you wouldn't be able to knock out. But unfortunately, we ran out of time, and we wanted to ship the project and didn't really have time to implement it in a way that we felt would have been necessary. So we ended up using the cooler of the two items, which was the knockout hammer. And some people really liked it, and then a few people were a little turned off by it because it's kind of a violent instrument.
Right. And I think too, again, when you're going back to the character development, we had a lapse of a year's time between mission 1 and mission 2, where Zaya, we really wanted to just, for everything that we could, we wanted to use everything we could to communicate that she had developed in that time from this kind of innocent seafaring merchant's daughter into someone who is willing to do damage to people, is willing to hit people over the head with a hammer. Not that she was just, had turned into this violent person, but that there's a bit of rage there because she's been abandoned and isolated in this place. Malik is her only friend. Kadar has been killed, as far as she knows, and she's seeking revenge. And so, what better way to get revenge than clobber people over the head with a hammer? but in this mission, she's not confronting the people that killed Kadar. She's confronting these innocent guards that are just doing their job, but in a way it kind of communicates, I think, in a subtle way, that this is not the same person that we saw at the beginning of the game. She's willing to go to some pretty drastic measures here to accomplish her goals, and the hammer communicates that she's willing to do some permanent damage to people,
Yeah. And it's funny, but knocking somebody out isn't necessarily a non-violent act to begin with.
Right, exactly.
So but you might do a little bit more damage with a hammer.
But there's something about the blackjack that's kind of softens it, because most of us have never been, have never handled a blackjack.
Yeah.
But the hammer, it's kind of, you kind of cringe, when you hear that crunching sound. And that
was courtesy of Paul Fox, by the way. He did a great job with the sounds.
You just hear the skull cracking.
But we should point out that we don't necessarily require the player to use that in any given circumstance. We wanted to leave T2X open to all different styles of play. And, some people like to go through and play on a rampage. Some people knock guards out and dispose of the bodies. And some people just sneak completely without ever interacting with any of the guards.
They'll just ghost the whole thing.
The
ghosters.
TTLG community term is ghosting, where
Litha style.
Litha style.
But we did make most of them. I know when I was beta testing, that's one of the main things I did. I tested every single mission to see if it could be ghosted, and they can be ghosted. You have
some
to
are harder
interact.
than others, but
some are easier. But there are ways to do it. For people that like to play in that style. So.
Yeah,
we had this thing forever. I remember in one of the original play tests going through and trying to break as many windows as I could, and they would always shrink down, to that smaller size. And then we fixed that. But we mentioned in the last mission there was one of them that we missed that was a real crucial one.
Yeah,
but
I think we fixed it in the patch though, which is good.
Yeah, it's probably good to talk about the museum too. We chose a museum purposely for a variety of reasons. First of all, as Rain was saying, we wanted to reacquaint the player kind of with the environment of the city and the tools, and had a lot of good little gameplay things in here where you could use all the different tools and weapons. But also, it's easy to forget maybe because it's a fan mission, and we're used to playing Garrett, but Zaya is a newcomer to the city. She doesn't know what a hammer is. She's never seen Burricks. She's not familiar with these things that we as players are familiar with, or that Garrett as a main character is familiar with. And so the museum was a good opportunity also to introduce her to all these elements, and because we couldn't just jump to her automatically understanding what those things are. It wouldn't have been believable plot-wise for her character to just know all these things that Garrett knows. And so the museum was an opportunity to show that you do have these religious factions, you do have the pagans, you do have, in contrast to some of that, then you've got like this room we're looking at here with all this artwork.
So it's an opportunity to do both.
Yeah, it's an opportunity to both. There is a sophistication to the city, but there's also a very rough and tumble side to it as well, and more of the uncivilized issue with the pagans. So just to give her the scope of introducing her to the city and help her to understand the scope of what this place was like, even though she's lived there for a year.
She's pretty sequestered with Malik. She wouldn't necessarily be out and understand who all these factions are.
Right.
So it gave us an opportunity to theme all the rooms. So there's a Hammerite room, there's a pagan room, there's like a mages area room. There's no keepers because people in the city don't know who the keepers are. Right. But it allowed us to present rooms dedicated to all these other factions.
Right. And and also when the smugglers come along later, I mean, obviously most people don't know anything about, you can't have a smuggler room in the museum. Yeah. So when she does discover in the office, as she will in a few minutes here, that there is a group of smugglers and they are connected to the museum, and then of course that plays into the dragon thing and all that. It also lets the player know, hey, there's going to be a new group. The smugglers were not just a convenient way to get rid of Kadar in Mission 1, but they're actually going to figure into the overall plot of the game.
And they actually become one of our most important, if not the most important faction that we have, because you deal with it pretty heavily for 4 or 5 missions in a row.
Right.
So speaking of reacquainting the player with all the different factions, one of the other things we wanted to do is keep the objective structure really pretty simple, reacquaint players with how the objectives work in Thief. So for this map and for actually many of the others, we stuck to the formula of the original missions, which was break into a location, steal one given object, get a loot minimum, and then escape. Those 4 objectives we really use. That's really the bread and butter of the Thief objective hierarchy. Because one of the things that's necessary in a campaign, I think, is to really keep the player focused on what it is that they're trying to accomplish. Really only give them 1 or 2 important plot details that they're focused on at any one given time. And when you have a fan mission that's completely separate, like a fan mission that exists on its own, then a lot of fan mission authors, myself included, have a tendency to create like a lot of secondary objectives, 8, 10, 12 objectives. And
optional
objectives, and force the player to go all over. And that might be fine for isolated maps, but it's not really what we wanted to do in the span of a campaign. We really wanted to keep the player focused and use objective changes only when necessary, because there are times when objectives change in the middle of a map with a plot device.
Right. And and trying to make sure that those were very, very clear. And that, again, that's something that Looking Glass was just, they were brilliant at that. They were very, very good at making out, one of the few games I've ever played where I never got confused about what I was supposed to be doing, but they didn't give you objectives in such a ham-fisted way that you felt like an idiot,
Yeah, Thief 2, I thought they used the objective change a little bit too frequently, but for the most part, their formula for communicating fiction to the player, I think, was really pretty outstanding. So we didn't want to deviate too much from that.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of that, one of the hallmarks of the Thief game, and it could be argued System Shock as well with the audio recorders, but your readables, your in-game readables, the books and the text and the notes that are in the trash can and all that. And again, I mentioned Valletta, and as I will probably throughout this, because she was so integral as far as helping to create the Thief atmosphere with the readables. She just did so much with that. And you can go into the text and document room, for instance, in this particular mission. Well, here we are. And she created all of the readables that are in this room, and there's maybe 15 of them or so. And if you were to read them, you would never in a million years think that they were written by the same person, because you've got poetry, you've got history, you've got there's one in here that's a note that somebody threw and hit someone else in the nose with. So you got some humor, and it's all written by her. And then in other missions, you got the same thing with Toolhead, one of our other we call them plot monkeys, that contributed a lot, particularly as we were nearing the end of development.
We should talk about that really quick, because in Mission 1 we mentioned that, in the Mission 1 commentary we mentioned that there was a plot team at the very beginning with a lot of people, and we kind of we wrote an overall plot summary that was done by Strange Blue that we used to kind of highlight the high-level points of the story, and it's what we gave to new members on the project to kind of explain what the project was about and give them a good overview. But after that point, after Strange Blue left, we really were left in the position where we needed more details, more fictional details with respect to each mission. And so what we did was we turned the mission design documentation over to the plot team, and at that point, that was really you and Valeta and Toolhead, and you three guys are the ones who really put together a lot of the specific details for secondary characters and objectives and what each mission individually entailed.
Yeah. And I was just always, I didn't do a lot. I kind of cracked the whip more than anything, but Val and Toolhead really, it was just amazing to me the amount of material that they were churning out. Once we really got going and we realized what all we needed, I don't even know how many documents we ended up with, but it's a lot. And it was a lot to proofread and all that, but it was amazing the stuff they would churn out and just the variety of it. Like I say, you go in one mission and there's all these different texts and there's just such a variety there, and I enjoy that so much just about the Thief world in general, but I thought that was one area, especially of T2X, where we, approached kind of the greatness of Looking Glass and being able to accomplish, the in-game text and all that. I was really pleased with the way that turned out and the quality of writers that we had for those. Yeah,
there's a couple unique aspects to the readables that are in the Thief universe, I think, that are different from most other games, because if you read the texts that are present in action RPGs or traditional RPGs, a lot of times they're very dry. They're either like history lessons on a fictional universe, or they're very obviously plot related. But in Thief, you don't really have that. The readables all are relevant in the sense that they're all about characters that you actually either encounter in the game or that you know about. Right. So they feel a lot more personal. You never get a dry history lesson, really. They're always somehow relevant, and most of them have gameplay information. Even if they're not related to your objectives, they might be related to a piece of loot that you find, or to a room or a secret room that you're going to encounter later in the game. So whenever you read those, whenever you click on those readables and they come up, you are immediately interested because it's going to be relevant to what you see right in front of you, not some abstract history lesson.
Well, and for instance, right there, she finds a secret room in the curator's office. If you were paying attention back in the city father's room, there's a note hanging up in there saying, "Hey, where did this such and such mummy go? There's a mummy that's missing. We can't find it." Well, then we find it that Limes, for whatever creepy, perverted reason, has secreted this thing away in his little hidey hole there, and is writing love poems to it and stuff. And that was kind of Valeta's thing.
We accept no responsibility.
Yeah, that was all Valeta. But and I thought it was so great the way that she could do that too. We have this mission with this. It's this posh museum where all these wealthy people come, and there's jewels and all this kind of stuff. And then this guy's hiding a mummy in his office. It just brings a real creepy element that's unexpected to this, and I thought that was just brilliant. But she would come up with stuff like that, and you just never knew what was going to come next, and it just added to me all these nice little moments that again made the original series so memorable. These little moments that you would have, and sometimes things that weren't even really necessary for the plot, but it was just a nice little side trip or a nice little subplot going on, and Toolhead and Valeta were able to churn those out. I mean, so many that we couldn't use them all.
Yeah, in fact, we ended up cutting a lot of the readables from maps just for pacing purposes because they were taking up too much time. And I think we cut we probably cut about 40% of the readables realistically from the museum. I'm probably almost half of what we originally had.
Right. And it was painful.
Yeah, it was painful to lose good material, but at the same time, it's a more focused experience when you have less.
Right.
You don't want the player reading all the time.
Yeah, but definitely if you haven't done that, in all the missions, but especially in this one, it's really worth going through and reading all the little plaques and all the little notes, because there's always something funny or gross or something that you'll find references to the original games, but there's even some references. I know in some of the ones I did, I would refer to different fan missions that maybe were popular with the community, or you'd use a name of somebody from a fan mission, and so there's a lot of little I don't know if they're Easter eggs, but a lot of little asides like that are just interesting. If you've played fan missions and if you're real involved, especially with the TTLG community, there's a lot of little in jokes and stuff. Not so much that it's distracting for somebody that's not familiar, but it's just nice if you are familiar with those things.
Yeah.
But
so we kind of missed a few minutes ago. Zaya walked by the big dragon statue in the main hall, and that was an important plot point for the mission because it's the dragon statue is the same one that she carries with her on her ship in Mission 1. And when you start out Mission 1, in the very first frame, there's a dragon head that's perched on a crate, and the dragon head is broken. And it's later repaired. You learn through readables in this map that it's been repaired and it's now on display. And we wanted to make sure that players kind of got that connection, that they recognized it. So it's mentioned many times. It's mentioned in the briefing of Mission 1, and there's a picture of it in the briefing of Mission 1. There's that first frame where you see the object in the world, at least the head of it, and then it's mentioned again in Zaya's logbook in Mission 1, which hopefully players will find and read.
Yeah. And then also in the conversation when you first enter the museum here.
And then so the first conversation in here mentions it again, and of course Zaya has a voiceover when you run by it.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the main things that we really tried to be careful of, is to make sure that those kind of plot elements were as clear as they could be. And again, you don't want to treat the player like an idiot. Thief, of course, is just in general assumes that the player is going to read everything and is paying attention to the conversations.
Which probably more so than any other game. Yeah, we didn't want to necessarily do that, though. We wanted to make sure that even players who run through really quickly are going to get at least the voiceover or the objective change or something when they pick up an object.
You've got to find a variety of ways, if it's possible to communicate something to the player in 2 or 3 different ways. You always want to do that so that it just can't be missed if it's pertinent to accomplishing an objective.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, it was interesting trying to find a spot for the dragon statue too, because we needed to make sure that the player was always going to encounter it when they played the map. We couldn't have it isolated away in a corner. We needed to put it right out front and display to make sure that the player would get that objective change and would find out the necessary information from that.
Well, another interesting thing about doing a project over the web like this is the artist originally imagined the dragon to be like hand size, where you could hold it in the palm of your hand, and the designers were picturing it as being this huge thing that couldn't be missed in the mission. We had to try to come together on that and figure out a way to make it big enough to be noticed. And
that was actually one of the earliest pieces we got. It's kind of low poly, like it's one of those art resources I wish we would have replaced at the end. I think I think it was perfectly good like way back in the day when we first started, but it's a big piece. You want it to be somewhat memorable.
Right.
I think it kind of is, maybe in the wrong way.
Well, but the thing is, you get down to crunch time where you need to go ahead and release the game, and do you really want to take the time because there's so much artwork that has to be churned out, and you've got a small team, they only have so much time, and you really start having to make some hard choices about what is necessary, what must be replaced, and what would be nice to replace, and you really can't do it all. The other thing I wanted to mention is the build of this thing. We have to give credit to Despot, who started out with this, and he went on actually to start the website The Thief Underground, which I don't even know if it's still alive and well, but he did the original blueprint and layout for this with very little information, actually.
Yeah, we actually the Mission 2, the museum, was one of the very first maps to start development. It was actually unfortunate because at the time we didn't have a really super clear design. We didn't have any new art resources, and we really weren't setting up our mission author, in this case Despot, for success because of all those things. And he wasn't a super experienced mission author, so it was almost bound to be rebuilt. I mean, we rebuilt most of our maps several different times. But in this case, it was almost guaranteed. So we really had 3 different drafts of this before we came up with a shippable version that we liked.
And the thing about the museum is it really did retain the original layout. This is what you're seeing here, what you're playing through as far as the floor plan. Is exactly what, not exactly, but very, very close to what Despo originally built. It was rebuilt from the ground up, but using the same blueprints pretty much.
Yeah, I think we changed some stuff around. I think it's about maybe 60 or 70% of the layout, but we always really like the idea of having different themed rooms and having everything connected. I think we eliminated like a courtyard or 2, and we reduced the wings so it didn't expand out quite as much on the west and east sides.
Well, I worked on this for about a year, I guess it was, and all I managed to accomplish during that time was to build a huge courtyard with this very elaborate gazebo that just ate frame rate like a monster, and I was not very experienced with drama, but when Dave got the map, that's when we started seeing a lot of the vertical gameplay where you could, go from balcony to floor, from the roof down to into a room, and it really opened up and made it much more what we originally envisioned, which was as wide open of a map as we possibly could within the context of it being a museum. Again, to contrast with Mission 1, which was so linear.
Yeah, by the time I took it over, I used the exact same geometry and built on top of it, but I really just wanted to add some vertical connectivity, some aesthetics, like some of the new textures and art, get a new lighting scheme, and really finalize the gameplay and scripting in there so that it was shippable.
Yeah. Another goal here too is to introduce the smugglers, which we did by making the connection between the curator and the smugglers. But and also there's a text in the office about the mechanists, so that players know that the mechanists are not in power yet. They're not as huge as they were in Thief 2, but they are starting to come on the scene and trying to sell a security system to the museum. So it gives us a little bit of context time-wise.